In the season finale of Single Drunk Female, Sam is forced to deal with a lot of Brit's drama when it comes to her wedding, and because Brit feels like there's something heavy on her chest she has to let go, she reveals something major. Also, Sam finds herself trying to deal with James's relapse all in the same day. For most of the season, we kind of been questioning what's been going on with Sam's dad. I mean, yes, we know he's dead, but in terms of what his effect was on everything, especially when it comes to Sam's mom, Carol, there was a question of, is he the reason why she has these insecurities, or is it something completely off? Well, we get our answer since in a dream sequence, Sam talks to her dad, and for the most part, he seems like a cool, normal guy. Definitely someone you may not take a lot of note of, but at the same time, there is a question of, is this just how Sam sees him? Is this how he actually is? So, unfortunately, while we do get to see him in real life, we don't get to really know him. Well, know him as he was, anyway. When it comes to Sam going to Brit's wedding, it started off rocky from the beginning. First, James didn't show up to pick up Sam and Carol, or maybe just pick up Sam, and with that, red flags start going off for Carol, but she's not trying to dig too deep because it's not about her today. It's not about, her usual poking and prodding about how things can go wrong. So with that, she lets it go. However, Felicia doesn't. Felicia decides, you know what, somebody has to call you out, and she's going to be the one to do it. And with that, there are some issues, but not really too many, since Felicia gets distracted by a gentleman named Peter, who Brit set her up with. And with that, Sam, James, all that drama is not her problem and not her interest. With that, Sam then kind of has split focus. All of Brit's friends, the enablers who were at her little wedding, her dress fitting, those people can't get Brit out of her room to actually walk down the aisle. So Sam is called in, and with that, Sam is trying to be helpful, but it's still kind of weird that her former best friend is marrying her ex. And to make things worse, Brit decides she wants to, let go of some heavy burdens, such as the fact that Brit got with Joel during David's Shiva, which means Brit and Joel hooked up around the wake of funeral. I don't fully remember what a Shiva is when it comes to Jewish culture, but pretty much she hooked up with Sam's ex on probably one of the worst days of Sam's life. And mind you, Sam was drinking while her dad was alive, so that day you can definitely foresee her getting that liquor hard on that day. But her telling Sam this is possibly what they really needed, and since we haven't really gotten to see how the relationship healed to the point of her not only being invited to the wedding, but actually coming to the wedding, I guess you can say this is what was the thing that fans were supposed to see to recognize that these two may actually hit a turning point, and it's not just a bunch of stuff happening in the background that we don't get to see to understand what's going on. That right now there is some type of desire for reconciliation on both sides, and not just because of Sam's guilt. But while things are a little bit iffy now between Sam and Brit, because that bombshell of what Brit did is definitely something that requires thinking a little bit about, James follows that up with him just being inebriated and Sam's pretty much tasting this when she kisses him. With that, the idea is, hey, let's get you to club 24/7, get you back on the wagon, yada yada yada. And James like, nah, let's just enjoy ourselves. And with Sam being a little bit more than a year sober, this is not something that she agrees with. She's not going to go down this rabbit hole with him. And since he doesn't want to get help, she decides, let's just break things off altogether. That's the best thing for me. And as for you, well, it's not clear what's going to happen between Sam and James at this point. Well, never mind what may happen to James, considering what we saw a few episodes ago when he was pretty much at his worst point. I'm talking about the Thanksgiving episode, which was like 1 or 2 years back when it comes to this show, and he seemed suicidal. But who knows? Maybe James may bounce back. We may see his brother and his family again. Hell, we may even see Sam become his sponsor, since clearly he may not have one. In the last topic, we're just going to talk about the aftermath. And from what it seems, despite the drama that was, Carol, she stayed at the party, probably wasn't even told what went on. And that just leaves Sam playing on her Wii by herself at home. At least that is until Brit shows up, and she shows up for reasons that I don't fully understand, since it seemed like her and Sam was going to take a little bit of a break after what just happened. But with Brit getting married against, I wouldn't say Brit got married against her will, but definitely she was pressured into it, because it seemed like she was looking for any reason possible not to get married to Joel. But either way, long story short, those two end up playing video games together, and it seems that Brit is going to be a very unhappy bride who knows, maybe she'll get an annulment. Maybe she'll understand why Sam drinks so much, because she'll start drinking, because between Joel and her work, who knows? Either way, season 1 ends with those two seemingly closer than ever, even if it is because Brit doesn't have any friends who aren't enablers except Sam. And as for James, we just have to hope for the best and try to not think about the worst. In terms of highlights, the top highlight for me is just Sam putting herself first, and that's mainly since up till now it seemed that Sam was definitely a bit lonely when it comes to her life, and getting a boyfriend like James, someone who has a notable career, finances, I think at this point had his own place, and is a pretty decent guy when he's not drinking, that seemed like a major come up for her. So for her to let that go, it's definitely a notable thing, especially since it was for the sake of her sobriety. And even though there's a chance that she could maybe make it work with him being off the wagon, at the same time, why test it? She's come so far in the past year and some change that to really allow herself to be put in a position where she's not only trying to take care of herself and maintain her sobriety, but deal with him not going over the edge because he struggles with it. It kind of gives you an idea of what it truly means to be an addict who's in love with another addict, and the trials and tribulations that can come when you both are dealing with various pressures that can trigger you. The second highlight for us is just finally meeting Sam's dad, and while yes, like so many things in this show, it feels like we don't have enough details, at the same time, at least we got a glimpse or semblance of an idea of who he is, what kind of dad he was, and maybe you can even kind of transfer the kind of guy we saw in that space to how he was with Carol, and make it so it's definitely less about what David might have done what David might have done when he was alive, and more so just the need to question what kind of life did Carol have growing up, and really wanting to know not just where David's family is, but also where Carol's family is, so that we can, put some pieces together, because the influences on her are definitely missing right now, and I want to know, why is she like the way she is? In terms of on defense, it's definitely just Brit, and also on one more thing when it comes to the on defense topics. Starting with Brit, my issue is they really didn't build up to her being a runaway. Well, she wasn't even a runaway bride because she went through with it. But saying that, it's kind of like, what is it that got her to this point? Because right now we don't really know much about Brit besides that she's Haitian, that she's a doctor, and I think that's about it. And with that being really much the sum of her character, and marrying Joe and the whole how she got with Joel thing, it pushes you to wonder, are we really supposed to strongly care that she's gonna be unhappy for however long she stays in this marriage? I mean, as kind of noted earlier, it's not like we got to fully see Sam and Brit's relationship heal after all this time, because this show jumps months at a time, not weeks or days like most shows. You get huge gaps that don't allow you to see the full picture or the full story roll out. And so while for Sam it's not terrible how they do that, since you want to see her get better because you're invested in her character, For everyone else, especially for Brit, it kind of leaves you feeling like you're missing pieces, you're missing storylines, you're missing development, which does them no good whatsoever. In terms of the second on defense topic, it's just that this didn't really feel like a season finale. It felt like a mid-season finale, but I don't know. I think the way that this show ran when it was months in between episodes instead of weeks or days, that made it so everything felt so rushed that we didn't get to have the meat and potatoes when it comes to various characters. So while Sam had a complete arc from her being a hot mess to being sober to the point of dumping her boyfriend because he threatened her sobriety, everyone else, it feels like we just barely finished their foundation. And even when it comes to James and his issues, I still feel that a lot of what we saw through him was just because they needed somebody who was going to screw up and relapse and all this, and he made the best target. Rather than doing Mindy, rather than doing Olivia, or anyone else that we met, he was the easiest target, so they took the easy way out. And I feel like with the way they finished the season, they did the same by having Brit confess this thing about Joel and the Shiva thing, when it came to Carol not saying or doing much, and even when it comes to meeting David, I think that was kind of a throwaway to kind of make it like a prize for making it this far, rather than it being like a major thing, which it probably should have been, since even though Sam was drinking way before her dad died, I would think that that was a major turning point because, you know, her father seemed to be her everything and one of the only consistent people that she liked in her life. Because yes, she was still good friends with Brit, but even before the whole Joel thing, there are some moments where you kind of wonder if the main reason that Sam and Brit were friends was because Sam wanted to get the hell away from her mom, more so than it was because Brit was this person who challenged her or was on her level or something like that. But again, a lot of the extra details that would really make this show feel fleshed out and not just Sam focused, we didn't get. So if anything, the hope for a second season is to flesh out all these people that we met, rather than just keep the steady pace of it just being months jumped at a time where Sam is the main focus, and when we see other people, it feels more like throwaway moments and something that really develops them as a character.